Okay, YouTube is live.
How do I make my video?
Just a second. Okay. So we're going to wait a few minutes because we had 66 pre-registered.
Okay, YouTube is live.
How do I make my video?
Okay. So we're going to wait a few minutes because we had 66 pre-registered.
Okay, YouTube is live.
How do I make my video?
I think that's the delay in the YouTube that I'm hearing. We're going to wait a few minutes because we had
Yes.
66 pre-registered.
That's the delay in the YouTube, but I don't know who has their YouTube playing.
It's
But we've
Wow.
heard it 3
delay in
times
the
now.
YouTube that I'm hearing. We're gonna... Better.
Yeah. Thank you, whoever did that. Maybe Steve.
Okay. Well, we're certainly glad to see everybody who's here. And we'll be getting started in a few minutes. We want to make sure everybody can join the meeting.
Am I right that there are 9 people right now?
9 panelists and 16 attendees.
Okay, where do I see them?
If you click on the participant
Oh, yes, there it is.
indicator at the bottom of the screen,
Thank
you can get the sidebar to have 2 sections. The upper is panelists, and it includes 2 divisions, and the lower is the chat.
We have just a few people on YouTube now, but I'm glad to have it available.
No, and the number of people who are in the attendee category
Okay.
is increasing.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead, Ted, and
All right.
and
Yeah,
then
so
go
welcome everybody to BayCHI, July, center of the summer, and a beautiful summer it seems to be, except for that we're all by ourselves. And so this is one of our chances to get together. Earlier this week, we had the online party, for a very small party for BayCHI, and I hope that people knew about it. And we talked about several topics that should be interesting or are interesting to anybody that's interested in computer-human interface. It gave us a chance to get to know each other better. From that conversation, we decided that we were going to start rehosting the dinners before BayCHI meetings, in which we're going to have a few topics, and maybe people will get together and discuss what they do in computer-human interface, and also what computer-human interface is becoming and is. BayCHI is a sub-organization of the Association for Computing Machinery's CHI special interest group, which is usually holds a conference of about several thousand people a year. This year it did not. And one thing I'm hoping to do is to make some of the talks that should have happened at CHI be something that maybe some of those speakers would give to our audience. So that's one of the things that might be coming up. For August, we are planning. We'll see if it happens as it was going to have Barbara Tversky, a famous psychologist, talk about what it's like to be a person. She wrote a nice book about that. In any case, I'm kind of interested in knowing how many of you here are new to the BayCHI meetings, and you can just indicate by raising your hands. And
virtual hand.
Yeah, virtual hands. And I see a whole bunch of hands going up. That's very exciting. We're always excited about having new people come, and we are interested in them becoming people that help build the experience of BayCHI. So get a hold of any of the officers, or online there's a person that looks for volunteers. And there's many things you can do. We have a variety of ways that this group tries to engage with the computer-human interface community, and that is, we are also considering people making groups, birds of a feather. But in any case, I'm happy to have you all here, and we will put up statistics about how many people came from different sources. This is a very special night tonight, and I don't want to say too much about it. That's really Nancy that's put this together, and I'm interested in her talking about why she did it and what this special night is here for, and how hopefully we'll all benefit from learning about disability some more this evening.
Thanks, Ted, and thanks to everybody who has come tonight to BayCHI. We're delighted to have you. We usually meet in a historic building in Palo Alto, Xerox, what used to be Xerox Park, P-A-R-C, but now it's called just Park. And one of the reasons I'm happy that we're meeting online instead is it's a difficult building to get into, not impossible, but to get into if you're mobility impaired. We have another friend who's come to BayCHI several times, but I think he feels like it's just a pain in the neck for him to get into the auditorium by walking through, letting the security guard let you in, and then wander down the hall following the security guard and take the correct elevator to go 2 stories down, and you come in at the stage level of the auditorium and then get to roll or walk with your crutches or whatever your mobility thing is over to the seats. So it's very awkward placement. But really what I want to say tonight is I've been looking forward to this particular meeting for many months. I offered to have Don come and talk last summer at this time, and then we had a bit of rigmarole about hiring interpreters at that time, and then I was starting to follow Sheri's work, and I'm so excited that I get to introduce you to both of them here, or maybe some of you already know them, or one or the other of them. A couple of ground rules for how we're going to conduct this. As you can see, we have one interpreter who is working right now from voice to sign. And when our first speaker starts speaking, he will be signing for himself, and you will hear the other interpreter's voice in English. So Don's going to sign in American Sign Language, and the interpreter, Dan, will interpret for him. When we get to questions and answers, we're going to have Patty signing for all of you who don't sign, and Dan will continue to do the voiceover. And then when we switch speakers to Sheri, we'll have one of them doing the signing and the other one doing the questions. And I don't know how they've worked that out. I'm very excited, not only that we have the kind of dream team of 2 really different dimensions about disability and accessibility being brought up here, one with respect to products and one with respect to employment. And so these are, you know, just crazy different ideas. And nonetheless, we're trying to serve the same wide variety of people with digital products and with crazy new ideas and inventions. So let's see, ground rules. We have captions going on. You can turn the captions on voluntarily yourself at each of your own stations, okay? And it's there's a closed caption control on the bottom of the screen, and it says show subtitles, and that will indicate in the black area at the bottom of the screen what my voice is saying, only in English text. And in order to do the interpreting well, we'd like you to not, anyway, we'd like you to take advantage of the interpreters, enjoy it, and also to realize that this is another language that's happening at the same time. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about this is I've been dreaming for years of my 2 academic specialties rolling in the same stream. And here it is, accessibility, especially with respect to deaf people, and human-computer interaction. And it's so exciting to see this here tonight. So I'm going to remove myself from the visuals. And Sheri, I think we're going to take you out of the visuals for the moment. If you can stop your video, and we'll bring you back in a few minutes. And now, if all of you will put yourself on speaker view, you'll be able to see just the interpreter and our first presenter, Don Grushkin, a professor at CSU Sacramento in Deaf Studies, who also vlogs on YouTube and has a column on Facebook and is a contributor to Quora. And that's where he and I bump into each other. We're in the same neighborhood in Quora. So without further ado, Don, tell us, whose design is it anyway?
Thank you, Nancy. Well, hello, everyone. My topic is, whose design is it anyway? My focus is really going to talk about technology and how technology actually has ways of being disempowering. About myself, my name is Donald Grushkin. I am deaf. My PhD is from the University of Arizona, where I specialize in language reading and culture. And now I teach at California State University, Sacramento. And my field of teaching there is deaf studies. Before I start, I'd like to throw a point out there for you to consider. Among people who can hear, their perception of deaf people is something like a person who has a broken subset of society and a person who is in need of repair or recovery through some kind of medical intervention or technological method, such as using a cochlear implant, which we'll be talking about a bit later on in my presentation. But that particular point of view is actually at odds with those of us who are deaf. We deaf people do not view ourselves as hearing people who happen to not be able to hear. That's not our self-perception. We view ourselves as a social group with its own language, its own history, its own literature, its own art, its own forms of expression. We are a people that have all of those things. One example of that is the artwork that you're looking at now, which was painted by a very famous deaf artist named Chuck Baird. This painting shows a child gazing at a deaf person who's an adult, who is looking down at the child and relating to that child and saying, yes, I am deaf too, making a symbol with their hand that indicates we are the same. So this is very much reflective of how we feel about each other, that we are all the same as deaf people and that we share a common and very unique culture. Marshall McLuhan once said this famous quote here. He said, we shape our tools, and afterwards our tools shape us. Makes a lot of sense. But actually that leads to an important question, which is, why are we making tools in the first place? And I couldn't find a particular quote that reflects my particular thinking on this, so I came up with my own and decided to document that quote, which I put here, which says, the tools of a culture reflect its priorities. What the people of a culture view as important, what we think we need, and how we can capture that need in our goals in order to help us succeed in attaining our goals. What tools do we need to help us attain our goals? That's what we would prioritize as the tools we need. So, for deaf people, technology has a way of disempowering us. It actually gives power and it taketh away, if you will. Here's an example. If you look at this cartoon way back in the old days when you'd go to a store to purchase something, you'd go up to the clerk or the cashier, and the person would type into the cash register the price, and the price would visually pop up in a way that a deaf person could see it visually and know exactly what the total was. And they could make that transaction effortlessly. Well, now, with new technology, all the new electronic scanning type gadgets we have in the stores, whereas before a cashier might, the cashier could actually see the price and then would kind of verbalize it. So to the deaf person, suddenly they've lost access to the visual that they had in the past. And now the clerk is sort of representing this on their lips, which is not accessible to them. So this is an example of we had accessibility in the past and now we no longer do. There are certain devices now in stores where the pay device is visible to us and you can't see the total on it. But in the beginning, when they were first introducing this technology and it was scan only, you weren't able to see anything. In many ways, technology is not accessible to us deaf people. And here's a video that shows that.
Transport and fine. Please
Catching up with, well, sorry, the interpreter missed voicing for the caption. Sorry about that. So obviously a technology here that was developed for hearing people at the airport is really great, but for deaf people, it's inaccessible. The accessibility is not there. Many times, hearing individuals might think, I wonder what deaf people might need. And they'll come up with inventions of things that they think are going to assist deaf people have more accessibility in the hearing world, so to speak. And here's an example of that in this next video. The headline says a new gadget, and then it went away, sorry, I couldn't read it. A microphone detects sounds in the surrounding areas, and it converts it into vibrations and light. The device can be worn in your hair or as earrings. Fujitsu is developing it to be worn on the skin. The device will expand the sensory experience of sound for the deaf. And the video seems to have, I think it's over. Yeah. So now this device was created as a way of helping deaf people to capture speech and sounds and convert that to something visual. But it actually might be rather annoying for a deaf person to have these vibrations coming at them on their body that way. And also the idea of having something attached to your head like that is not very appealing. What it does is it marks a person. It marks a person as being different. And so then they stand out, which is actually a harm to them. And for myself, you know, I'm a man And call me old-fashioned, but you know, I don't want to have anything sticking out on my head. So the fact that these designers are expecting us to just welcome wearing this device on our heads, I don't think that's going to fly.
Our tongues help us make sounds and speak. And of course, we taste with our tongues, but get this, we soon may be able to hear with our tongues, thanks to a research team at Colorado State University.
This is the part of the device that we actually put into our mouth.
This is 19. This testing gadget, covered with electrodes to translate sounds into tongue stimulation, is the experimental first generation of what this tongue expert, Professor Leslie Stone-Roy, says could be a less invasive, less expensive alternative to cochlear implants.
The ultimate device is going to be something that fits inside the mouth and that you can't see, like a dental retainer.
It's tempting to compare this tongue device to Braille. With Braille, if you can't see well enough to read the words, then you use your finger and you teach yourself to read the words that way. But you haven't taught your finger to see. Researchers say that with this tongue device, once you've taught your tongue and your brain to work together, you've actually taught your tongue to hear.
You would have to wear it typically 3 to 4 weeks, we think, maybe even 2 or 3 months to fully begin to allow your brain to interpret these signals as words or sounds. Okay, go ahead.
Engineering professor John Williams co-leads the team.
So do you feel those?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now do you want to go? Okay.
Having his tongue mapped for sensitivity to figure out how much variety there is among tongues and what pattern of electrodes works best.
These little electrodes here are being kind of energized depending on what frequency.
I'd like to make a good impact on the world, you know, maybe change some people's lives.
And to be able to get those people to be able to hear like they did when they were younger, when their ears were working, is what really kind of excites me about this type of technology.
We're really up in the game for the tongue here.
Yes, tongues are awesome.
And tongues could soon be even awesomer if these researchers can put words in our mouths by teaching our tongues to hear.
Now, I look at this and I think, I'm going to have to learn how to interpret sounds, complicated speech through my tongue. Plus, this device is going to create vibrations in one's mouth, and having that in your mouth all day long is not appealing. It might lead to some numbness. It might lead to some lack of taste, destroying your taste buds. It's not appealing at all. To me, it's a very silly idea.
So here's the concept. So as I'm speaking, my sound is getting captured by the tablet, and then it's getting mapped onto a vest that's covered in vibratory motors, just like the motors in your cell phone. So as I'm speaking, the sound is getting translated to a pattern of vibration on the vest. Now, this is not just conceptual. This tablet is transmitting Bluetooth, and I'm wearing the vest right now. So as I'm speaking, the sound is getting translated into dynamic patterns of vibration. I'm feeling the sonic world around me. So we've been testing this with deaf people now, and it turns out that after just a little bit of time, people can start feeling, they can start understanding the language of the vest. So this is Jonathan. He's 37 years old. He has a master's degree. He was born profoundly deaf, which means that there's a part of his belt that's unavailable to him. So we had Jonathan train with the vest for 4 days, 2 hours a day, and here he is on the 5th day. Twitter's going crazy. So Scott says a word, Jonathan feels it on the vest, and he writes it on the board. Experiment kind of secures funding forevermore, right? Where? If successful. Jonathan's able to translate this complicated pattern of vibrations into an understanding of what's being said. It's amazing, but isn't most of the evidence so far that sensory substitution works? Not necessarily that sensory. Now he's not doing this.
So There's another variation on the same theme. Having deaf people perceive sound through vibrations on their body. Now I look at that, and once again, I'm going to have to interpret things through sensing vibrations. I really doubt that's going to work. One of the big things I notice here is that words are being tested in isolation. So maybe a person can learn the pattern of one word in isolation at a time like that. But when you speak, you don't speak in one word. You're speaking several words all stringing together, which means you're going to have a really florid series of vibrations happening all over your body. And I don't think that's going to work. Another big issue here has to do with the fact that all of these things, you know, that we've been shown here have all been designed by hearing people. I don't know to what extent deaf people have been involved in their design, although I doubt it's been very much. You'll notice that everyone in the audience had a lot of applause for this invention. And what they were applauding was, quote, the deaf person, quote unquote, overcoming their deafness. And that's the part that probably bothers me the most. As I said before, we deaf people do not view ourselves as broken hearing people or as people who want to become hearing people. And yet this device is attempting to make us become hearing.
So here's the con.
So that leads to cochlear implants, which is of course ubiquitous now, and there's a lot of hype around cochlear implants and how they quote unquote, you know, are so great and make a person become hearing, which is actually not true. The way the cochlear implant works is electrodes are put in the brain, and there are a very limited set of electrodes that are used. There are only 22 different touch points that they have in the cochlea. Out of all the possible touch points there are, only 22 are used. And supposedly they replicate what hearing people can hear, but they don't actually, because the natural cochlea has access to a much wider range of frequencies than what these electrodes cover. If you get into similar sounding words such as A, D, F, you're going to get certain frequencies of those sounds hit, but not the full range. And so it's not restoring anything like normal hearing. And I will give you an example of that here. The screen saying this is a video simulation of what a cochlear implant, speech through channel, through a four channel cochlear implant, sorry. And now speech through a 12-channel cochlear implant. And now speech through a 20-channel, and now normal speech. It says cochlear implants also work for music. The type of music demonstrated is considered to be the easiest for implant users to appreciate. This is due to its dominant single note instrument playing at an appropriate pitch combined with a strong rhythmic beat. Now music through an 8-channel CI. Now through a 12-channel cochlear implant. And now a 20-channel cochlear implant. So, oops, there's one, and now the normal music. So there's obviously, the cochlear implant doesn't provide anything close to normal hearing at all.
There are 14 varieties of tomato soup available from this
With data on the edge of the old city center.
Pasta with
And Farm Point Station. Any damage there? Negative
Hot.
damage to Farm Point.
Hot, plain tomato soup.
Carefully avoiding hitting the station. It's from an unidentified vessel that's entered into orbit with us.
So this is a Star Trek episode where the computer can understand speech, interact with the person who's speaking. And so that's really a priority for hearing people. It's a very hearing person-centered design. It suits their needs. It fits their needs easily so that a hearing person can speak to this device without any need to type anything. For deaf people, this doesn't really work. I've tried to use Siri before, and it doesn't understand my speech. I speak into it, and it does anything but what I'm really asking for. So Siri was really designed for hearing people.
Hello. My name is Thomas, and this is Navid. We are inventors in the Lemelson MIT Student Prize Competition.
Access to communication is a basic fundamental human right, and every single person deserves to be a part of the global community. However, those who are deaf or mute communicate differently than everyone else. They primarily use sign language, while the rest of the world communicates verbally. This puts the deaf-mute community at a disadvantage, because like a foreigner in another country, they can't communicate like everybody else. What we decided to do is create gloves that translate sign language into text and speech. We have had extensive work with individuals in the disabled community, and have seen firsthand their daily struggles. We wanted to develop something that would help the deaf and mute better communicate with the rest of the world, without changing how they already interact with each other. By simply putting on a pair of gloves, those who utilize American Sign Language can now communicate with the rest of the world the same way they communicate with each other.
The gloves work by utilizing sensors on the hand and wrist to measure hand position and hand movement. The gloves then send this data to the computer via Bluetooth for processing. Once the computer recognizes and interprets the sign, it then outputs the corresponding word or phrase in text and speech. If you were to say, "Hello, I'm well, thank you," it would look something like this.
Hello. I'm well. Thank you.
And just like that, we've translated American Sign Language into spoken English instantly.
There are approximately 70 million deaf-mute people in the world who use sign language, but over 7 billion humans on the planet. Our device revolutionizes the way these two communities understand and interact with each other.
Currently, there is no commercial sign language translator on the market. With this invention, over 70 million people achieve a new level of independence. 70 million people gain access to a new job, and 70 million people secure an improved quality of life, all with the help of a pair of gloves. We believe that access and inclusiveness are catalysts for change.
These gloves were crafted with this principle in mind and seek to promote a more unified global community.
So here, once again, we have hearing people coming up with something that they think is going to help deaf people. And it's not clear that they know so much about deaf people, apparently not, especially when they use the term deaf mute, which is a big no-no, I will have you know. But the other big glaring problem here is that when they're talking about putting on a glove, you're not just finger spelling isolated letters. Isolated letters on a glove are not sign language. And there are other people who have attempted to make those kinds of things. This particular device that was in the video attempts to go one better and do actual signs, but those signs were not really reflective of the true natural American Sign Language, which is quite complex and has a very complex grammatical structure, which includes using parts of the body and parts of the face. So having the glove that they're making, while they think it's making actual signs, is only making parts of signs. So there's a lot of problems with the gloves. First of all, they're unidirectional. You can only point them one way. You have to point them toward the hearing person that you're talking to. So it's really for the hearing person to understand everything I'm trying to say. Now, how about when the hearing person is going to say something to me? Where's my access to what they're saying? I'm still deaf, and I'm still not going to have to do a lot of extra work to understand this person, whether or not I'm wearing a glove. So there's an imbalance in the communication happening.
Hello.
That says technology is constantly evolving and speech recognition is the future. It's virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa are making many people's lives easier. Showing people using the Alexa by speaking to it. But what about people who are deaf or hard of hearing? Meet Abhishek. Abhishek is signing. He's the camera on the PC on the laptop is capturing his sign language. He asks what is signs, what is the weather? And now Alexa is answering in print, the weather in New York is 96 degrees or whatever. So proving that sometimes accessibility just takes a little bit of creativity. And you see more examples of Abhishan signing to Alexa and Alexa responding in print. He waves goodbye. Alexa says bye for now. So now making Alexa be able to understand signs is, again, not really ASL. Alexa is able to maybe capture individual signs, signed in a very stilted manner, which is not really natural. It's not natural signed communication the way we deaf people sign with each other. And I'm sure some of you have used speech-to-text software. It's been around for a while now. How reliable is it? Let me ask you that. It isn't very reliable still, is it? Now imagine that same situation with a three-dimensional language that you're asking this device to not only capture the individual phoneme input, you're having it to have it interpret facial expression, body language, and all the complex parts that go into a sign. So once again, it's unidirectional. I can sign to Alexa, but when Alexa wants to say anything back to me, it's not using sign language to communicate back to me. And of course, you know, it's a hearing person who's been behind the design of this thing for the deaf. Now, when we go to the movies, we're all sitting in the same room together, but what I have to do in order to watch a movie is somewhat different than everyone else. I either have to put some kind of a device onto the chair in front of me, which is called a cap view. I don't really call it the cap view. My word for it is the crap view, because actually it's a device that makes it really impossible to watch the movie along with the captions. It's about the size of a little rear view mirror. So you're looking at this tiny little thing and then readjusting your eyes to look at the big screen that's in front of you and having to go back and forth between those little things. It's really doesn't fit. Another technology are special glasses that a deaf person puts on that has the captions being beamed onto the lens of the glasses. This is a little bit better. It's a little bit step in the right direction, but both of these devices don't always work perfectly. The batteries die, parts get worn out, and And again, it marks us. It marks us when I go to the movies, when we deaf people go to the movies, suddenly we can't just go sit down. We have to go to a special line of customer service, get this device, carry it to our chair in plain view of everybody else at the movie theater who are now talking amongst themselves saying, what are these people doing with these funny devices? We're being marked. Whereas a hearing person can just go get their popcorn, go to their seat and watch the movie. We deaf people have to take this additional step in order to appreciate the same thing that you do, just as a matter of course. Now, you might be thinking, I'm just here to complain. Well, no, that's not true. I'm here to also tell you what we really want, what we deaf people really want. Let's talk about the movies. Why can't we have open captioning on films? It's really not that much trouble. It doesn't take up that much screen real estate. It really doesn't detract that much from the movie watching experience for everyone else. Or why not invent some kind of filter? Something like 3D glasses. Because people sometimes go to the movies and put on those 3D glasses. We wouldn't stand out so much, and they could be designed in such a way so that the captions would show up without us looking like we've got, you know, this strange robotic thing on our heads. Instead, we're using 3D glasses, which everybody can relate to. Touchscreen machines that are used for ordering things are good for us when you walk into a restaurant or whatever, things like that. But now in this time of coronavirus, I don't know if it's such a good idea to have touch screens available for people to order because of the ability to spread germs that way.
It does not seem to be cooperating for the video. But as you guys can see, as soon as the lights turn to red on the other side, it is in fact flashing. So I just thought that was something pretty cool since I've not seen it before ever.
So this is a strobe light on a traffic light. It's really kind of unnecessary because a red light communicates being a red light anyway, but this might be something that a city could use to alert people that an emergency vehicle is approaching. And for that, I would really applaud that kind of use. It's the street light, the traffic light would suddenly have a different sort of light flashing that would indicate that an emergency vehicle is approaching, and that it would be automatic, or that it's a strobe light that's flashing when the light's about to turn red to warn people it's about to turn red. And this wouldn't help just deaf people, it would help hearing people too. It would help everybody. Now, automobile companies, they're making amazing great strides toward deaf-friendly design, as this video shows.
모든 소리의 패턴을 인공지능으로 분류하고 구분해
there's English on the screen that's talking about how it delivers a visual experience from the dashboard. Distances to obstacles on the road are detected using sensors, and then the user is notified with vibrations of different length on the steering wheel. In 2018, December, the quiet taxi takes off. So now the touch screen is asking, please state your destination. It automatically appears on the screen. It says beginning trip. The steering wheel is lighting up on the left side, as well as the audio saying there's a left turn in 200 meters. The little kids in the back seat are getting a kick out of seeing the lights. An emergency vehicle is approaching, and the steering wheel is now flashing all kinds of red lights. And there's also sort of a reflective image on the dashboard that shows an emergency vehicle. Don now. I really like this because it's visual. And it's also kinetic. It's giving me kinetic information as well. So I think this really suits what deaf people need, and deaf people would embrace this kind of technology. So my recommendations are, first of all, don't do anything about us without us. Instead of a hearing person taking it upon themselves to get some recognition and perhaps some monetary value out of doing something for us, hold on. Bring in deaf people to work with you, work with deaf people, get their input and their feedback, and have them have some opportunity to be completely involved in the process. And even if you don't, listen to what deaf people want. Listen to our voices. Listen to what we want, what we have to tell you. Secondly, design things from a deaf perspective, which amplify our strength. Don't highlight or try to fix what you perceive as our weakness, not being able to hear, but work with what's our strengths. Third, make sure that any functionality you're providing is going to work both ways. It has to be bidirectional. It's not just for hearing people to take advantage of. It's for us deaf. It has to be for us deaf people's benefit as well. It has to go both ways and be bidirectional, because communication is a two-way street. So, any questions?
Thank you, Don. And Smita, if you can start up Patty's video. Don, I wanted to, sorry, I want to see Patty here. Ah, there we go. Okay. So Don, I want to thank you very much. You're highlighting so many of the things that we have talked about several times. And I wanted to bring up also that one of the people in the audience, Michelle Vincent, made the observation, which I think you implied, but I'd love to underscore it. All these technologies depend on the deaf person doing the training and the work. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. It goes back to the point I made before, my first point, which says, don't do anything about us without us. Nothing about us without us. Make sure that deaf people are involved in the process every step of the way and at every level.
I'm going to read to you from the chat from Daniel Fisher, who says, thank you for presenting these informative case studies and examples. And as you and I have mentioned before, there is a construct in user experience design and research called participatory design, recommending exactly that approach for anything involving disabled people. That is to say, those of us who are disabled by the environment we've all created. So I appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the audience? You can put them in the chat.
Yeah, and if I can maybe say something about that. I just wanted to just add to what Nancy just said there. And I totally support universal design as an idea. And I think there are things that really do help deaf people and can help hearing people as well. For example, the steering wheel of that car we just saw in the video, that's going to help everybody. The strobe lights flashing on a regular old traffic light, having that extra light there is providing more information to everyone, not just deaf people. So hearing people are going to benefit as well. So universal design is a great concept, yes.
So let's see, we've got a couple of questions here. Carla, I'm going to read your question. which says, how are you getting along, Don, during the pandemic with everybody wearing face masks? Do you have any suggestions for products that have come out of this recent experience?
It sucks. It sucks. Yeah. But, you know, there are a few masks that are transparent in a way now. There's one of them that the FDA has approved, but I'm not really wild about it. It's kind of small. It's just got this small little narrow opening, which isn't really enough. There's another one that actually has a wider transparent area, which is better. But the one I like sort of covers more of your face with a transparent area, or it's actually more like the face shields, actually. Those work the best for us.
And I bet there are lots of other product ideas that haven't been explored well. Ted asks, do you have any favorite collaborations with companies or inventors? Have you participated in any?
Myself personally, no. Well, no. Not that I can think of offhand right now, but I think any company that really wants to involve deaf people at all levels, and provides equitable compensation to them for their involvement, I would support that.
Great. Any other questions for Don right now? And if we want to pause for a moment and let you all think about it, I'll be happy to introduce our second speaker. Any other parting thoughts, Don? We're gonna, okay.
No. Mm-mm.
Good, beautiful work. Thank you so much. And so I'm going to let your video, you can
Sure.
take yourself off the video. Sheri, bring yourself back on, or Smita, bring you back on. And we'll have you again for Q&A, Don. Okay, cool. And I'm going to get rid of my own image as soon as I introduce Sheri. Sheri Byrne-Haber is an accessibility lead at VMware. She is an extremely accomplished and a determined person. And she's going to talk to us tonight about hiring and recruiting underrepresented minorities, including people with disabilities. So Sheri, take it away.
Thanks, Nancy. And my secret fun fact is I'm probably the only person who's ever come to a BayCHI event on a date with my now husband 15 years ago. So we're both in HCI related fields. He works on user interface design for system administrators, and I work on accessibility. So we keep it all in the family. Oh, it says my screen sharing's disabled, so I need to be promoted.
Looks like you should be able to do it now.
Yep, that looks more promising. Okay, slideshow. I'm beginning. All right, so hi everybody. I'm Sheri Byrne-Haber. I'm here to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is employment specifically related to people with disabilities, but a lot of it overlaps with just underrepresented minorities in general. And when you talk about underrepresented minorities, you could just say URMs. The people with disabilities frequently get left out. The government definition of URMs is largely gender and ethnicity based. So if you belong to any other category, you're older than the average person in your employment field. You have a status as a caregiver, status as somebody who was a veteran. You're not considered an underrepresented minority for the purposes of what the government is measuring. So that's why we usually call them out separately, because when sometimes we're talking about the government definition of minority, and sometimes we're looking at the larger definition of what constitutes a minority. So I'm a big fan of the ADA. I have a congenital disability. I was born with club feet and a spinal curvature. So up until the time I was 25, there were very few accessible parking spaces. There were very few curb cuts. I chose to go to Cal Berkeley largely because Ed Roberts had trailblazed for people in wheelchairs a decade earlier. And so Cal was more accessible than the average college. But one thing the ADA has not been good at is it's not been good at employment for people with disabilities. And so I could go on and on about the statistics and everything involved it, but I think this graph speaks 1,000 words. So it starts off in the 1990s when the ADA was passed. The employment rate for people with disabilities was 50%. So 50% of people who had disabilities had a job. More recently, we're looking at employment rates hovering in the low 20s. So we've lost more than half of our employment since the ADA was passed. And the ADA was intended to be something that was supposed to help with employment, but it hasn't really turned out that way. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little, I already talked about that, but I'm going to talk about the 3 basic phases that you have to make sure that you're working on, because it's not just enough to find people with disabilities. You have to make sure that you have policies in place that support people with disabilities, and you have to make sure that the people with disabilities want to stay around. Because if you hire people with disabilities and then, you know, don't involve them with the decisions that are being made about them, just like in Don's presentation, they're not going to feel welcome. They're not going to feel like they belong, and they're going to try to go find somewhere where they do feel welcome and they do feel like they belong. So just to talk a little bit about the pandemic effect on employment before we move on. So in a survey that was done by the Global Disability Institute, 51% of people with disabilities feared losing their jobs. This survey was done in June, or had lost their jobs. And 20% of them had lost their jobs. Looking at the same question amongst the non-disabled community, it was 28% feared. So almost twice as many people with disabilities feared losing their jobs. Okay, partly because it's the famous last in, first out type of mechanism, where people with disabilities are frequently hired only when the employment market is really tight and there are no other alternatives. And so they're also the first people shown the door if people are getting kicked out by seniority. And the other reason being that people with disabilities tend to have lower levels of employment. I'm generalizing here. Don is very educated. He has a PhD. I have 2 graduate degrees. So there are plenty of people with disabilities who are highly, highly educated. But if you look at the dropout rate in high school, the dropout rate in college, how many people with disabilities go to grad school, the pipeline keeps on getting more and more constrained as you move further up the education chain. And so again, those people are more likely to be in blue collar jobs because of lower levels of employment, which means they're more likely to have been affected, not infected, by the pandemic. Okay, so there are 5 steps to the recruiting process that need to be considered when you're trying to recruit people with disabilities. And so I have a slide on each of these in detail. The first is organizational research. So that's somebody looking into, you know, what company do I want to apply to for work, looking at the career site, what jobs are open, is this a good place to work, is this a bad place to work? Then the second is the actual applications process. The third is the interviewing stage, and interviews can be in person or they can be digital. Either way, it has to be accessible. There's an offer stage and the onboarding stage. Now, one thing that's really different about recruiting today versus recruiting 30 years ago when the ADA was passed, especially in larger companies, is so much of this is done now on the internet, and so much of it involves third-party companies. Large companies, they don't do their own background checks. They outsource that to people. They don't write their own paychecks. They outsource that to people. They have somebody check your passport. They have somebody take your job application. Nobody does any of this work beginning to end anymore. And so it's really important at every step of the way in your corporate recruiting process, you own the relationships and the contracts that you're signing with people. It's your job to ask these companies, hey, ADP, are you accessible? Hey, Brass Ring, can somebody who's blind apply for a job on your website? Because you control the money and money talks. So that impacts literally every single step of the recruiting process. And it's something that's really important that I wanted to call out first. Sorry, I lost my cursor there for a second. Okay, so in terms of organizational research, some of the things that people will look at to decide whether or not they're interested in a job at your company is they'll look at your website. Okay, so some people just have marketing websites. VMware's website, it just talks about VMware. We don't have a store, we don't sell things, but some places do have stores and sell things, or some places, colleges, for example, you can take classes through their portals. So what constitutes an accessible website kind of depends on the organization and what it is that they're doing with it. Another thing that's important is accessible social media. So although the WCAG, and that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, doesn't necessarily apply to social media, it's still really important to make your social media accessible, because especially for younger people, that's literally where they get almost all their news and information about companies these days. They don't even go to the websites anymore. They go to Instagram to see what's showing up about your company, or Facebook. Accessible events are really important. If you're having a hiring event in person or online, you want to make sure that those are accessible. So there are physical access considerations for in-person events. And that's including things like, and I remember using my cane to get into parks. So I know how much fun that was, because that was before I went back to using a wheelchair full time. You know, making sure that it's easy to get around, making sure that there's no cords that people are going to trip over, or that they don't have those really monstrous plastic covers that you can't get a wheelchair over because you can't get enough torque for them. Making sure that the registration process, which is usually through Evite or some type of electronic reservation system, is accessible. For digital, you want to make sure that you have a perfect setup. It's like the one we have here. We have 2 interpreters, and I'm sure the interpreters are happy that there are 2 interpreters. Interpreting is tiring. They need to be able to switch off. And then I'm enjoying the cart down at the bottom, because I'm more of a visual learner. So even though my hearing isn't that impaired, I still like to be able to read things out at the bottom. And you can see, some of you may see, even if you didn't have closed captioning turned on, I have it turned on all the time through PowerPoint. So that's a new feature with Microsoft. Anytime I am doing a PowerPoint presentation, it automatically captions for me. And another thing is what I like to refer to as ableist job descriptions. So I did a whole article on these on my blog because I was really annoyed one day. So I actually saw an ad for a graphic design manager. Okay, so an artist type person. They wanted somebody with UI and UX experience, website design, things like that. For a major retailer, let's just say the initials are BBB and leave it at that. And one of the requirements was that this person had to be able to use a mouse and a keyboard simultaneously. That was actually written into the job description 3 months ago, 30 years after the ADA was passed, which is ludicrous. I can't use a mouse. I don't use a mouse at all. Lots of people don't use mice. That doesn't mean I'm not qualified to do that job. And so that's basically code for disabled people need not apply. And you see that in some obvious places and some less obvious places. So the less obvious place is going to be you must be able to lift 20 pounds. Who was the last programmer who had to be able to lift 20 pounds? What, the heaviest thing I lift is my laptop. You must be able to stand 4 hours, or you must be able to sit 4 hours. These requirements are really trying to eliminate people with disabilities from applying. They're saying you're not welcome here, and preventing them from getting into an awkward situation where they interview somebody who is qualified and it turns out they're in a wheelchair and they don't really want that person working for them. So really review all of your job descriptions, make requirements, make sure that everything in there has to be there. If the job description is for a surgeon, then absolutely leave those requirements in. Do you want a surgeon who can't stand or sit for 4 hours? Probably not, okay? For programming, it shouldn't matter. It doesn't impact that person's ability to do that job at all. So that is the summary of step 1 of phase 1, which is organizational. Then step 2 is the applications process. So the standard we want to see met at a minimum is the WCAG 2.0 AA, preferably 2.1 AA, but 2.0 at a minimum. Many third-party job applications are not accessible. Do not confuse overlays with being accessible. So you see these blue and white pictures of Vitruvian Man, the Da Vinci guy, and you click on them and it brings up a bunch of stuff. This is Don's classic example of nothing about us without us is for us, except for the non-deaf community. So they designed this for, somebody who could use a mouse, designed that tool for somebody who couldn't use a mouse. Somebody who could see designed that tool for somebody who couldn't see. Somebody who was colorblind decided that they wanted to be able to specify colors for somebody who is colorblind. None of those options are what we would have selected for ourselves. Even with the overlays installed, you're still not passing the compliance, the WCAG compliance standards. They are, for my definitions, useless and sometimes worse than useless. And in fact, the litigators who have been suing over inaccessible websites have now sued almost 100 websites who have been using these overlay tools and saying, hey, we know you use this overlay tool, you're still not accessible. Okay. Any assessments that your company is performing must be accessible. HackerRank is not accessible. Okay, that's the most common assessment tool used in Silicon Valley. You need to make sure that if you're using an inaccessible tool, that you have an accessible substitute process if somebody requests an accommodation. And you want to put it in large print saying, if you need accessibility accommodations, this is what we want you to do. Okay, the last thing you want to do is tell somebody that the assessment process isn't accessible, that you're going to get back to them, and then 2 weeks later tell them, oh yeah, by the way, you've already filled the job. Okay, somebody just paid out 75 grand for that in an EEOC complaint. Okay, that's got to stop. This needs to be real time. You need to set it up in advance. These nice people who are interpreting for us and doing the cart for us, you have to have contracts with them. You have to have gone through your procurement if you work for a really large company. You can't turn these things around in 24 hours like you could for somebody who didn't need accommodations. So all that stuff has to be set up in advance. So when, and I'm saying when, not if, somebody asks for an accommodation, you can pull the trigger on it as quickly as possible. Okay, well described and easy to find accommodations process probably goes without saying, but I've already said it. And then you want to think a little bit about best practices. There are things that you can do above and beyond the minimums that, like for example, perhaps you could avoid using an ornate script, or you could avoid heavy use of italics. That's not mandated under the WCAG, but it sure makes it a better experience for somebody with dyslexia, for example. So think about the things that you could do even above and beyond the 50, well, actually 2.0 AA has 38 guidelines, and then 2.1 has an additional 12. So 50 altogether between the two of them. So that's the applications process. I'm going to stop at phase 1. I don't know if people are typing questions in or not, but I'll check for questions on that, and then I'll move on to phases 2 and 3. So interviews. Probably a duh statement. Interviews must be physically or digitally accessible. If you're doing digital interviews, they have to be accessible like the talk we're having right now. If they're physical interviews, then you need to make sure that people can physically access the space that you're doing the interview in. So like one thing that drives me crazy is that, you know, conference rooms that are overstuffed with chairs, I can't get my wheelchair around the table sometimes. So think about where am I going to put this person for the interview? Are they going to be moving from room to room, or am I going to be bringing people to them? You need to kind of map the whole thing out in your head to make sure that you really get it right. But probably the most important thing on this list is anybody who's ever doing an interview needs to have unconscious bias training. And specifically, they need training on how to interview people with disabilities, okay? The fact of the matter is you're not going to get firm handshake and eye contact from everybody with a disability that you're interviewing. I don't shake hands at all because of the arthritis in my hands. It doesn't mean I can't do the job. But if that's what you're evaluating on, then I'm going to end up getting inherently discriminated against. Okay. Again, accommodations are required throughout the process, from even thinking about applying to the job all the way through after they start, the disabled individual starts a job. And at no time during this process does the person with a disability need to disclose that they have a disability. So you should not be asking questions about the disability. You should not be saying things like, well, are you sure you can do this job? Or 2 jobs ago, I got the question, this job requires a lot of travel. Are you sure you can travel that much? Which is a question in today's day and age just should not be asked. And then finally, multiple communication channels using multiple modalities. My 28-year-old daughter is deaf. She wants a chatbot. That's how she wants to be able to communicate with people. If you only provide a phone number, she's not going to use it. If you provide an email address, she may or may not use it. But if you provide all 3, she's going to know, A, you thought about multiple modalities, and B, she's going to pick the chatbot because that's the way a lot of people her age with hearing loss want to communicate. And finally, return the darn messages. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories about people trying to leave a voicemail to request an accommodation and getting a thing saying, we're sorry, this mailbox is full. So yeah, having somebody follow up on those things is really important. Okay, the offer stage. I call this death by 1,000 PDF files. Now that may be because of the way VMware's offer stage works, but I think we have something like 21 different PDF files that we send back and forth with our candidates as part of the offer. They get the offer, they get the benefits package, they get to choose between all their different insurance plans. So there's enrollment, there's health insurance or long-term disability insurance, I-9 paperwork, retirement plans. Everything has its own PDF file, and lots of them, in fact, most of them come from different companies. So every single company needs to make sure that the PDF file that they're providing to you, the hiring company, is accessible, because you can't change those PDF files. Typically, they come to you in unedited form. So you need to get somebody to try them out with a screen reader, try them out with a switch, and see if they're actually accessible or not. And if they're not, require the company, the vendor that you're using, to provide you with accessible information. And then background checks. I actually heard a story about somebody who had been told that their job offer was going to be revoked because they hadn't passed the background check. And the reason why they hadn't passed the background check was because all of the options that had been given to them to provide proof of their previous employment were inaccessible. They didn't have access to a paycheck stub through the inaccessible portal. They didn't want to turn over an entire copy of their tax return. They could have done that, but then, like Dawn pointed out, you're just treating somebody with a disability completely differently than you're treating somebody with a disability. So that's really important. If you've got any steps along in the offer process where somebody could actually lose the offer because they're not turning around things quickly enough, or because third-party paperwork's not getting filled out, you really need to double check all of those points to make sure that they're accessible. And then the onboarding. So this is kind of like, if you think about it in terms of being pregnant and giving birth, they talk about after the baby is being born as the 4th trimester. Onboarding is the 4th trimester of the job hunt. So all of the necessary software needs to be installable, activatable, and usable in an accessible manner. If you have a software catalog, which lots of larger companies do, you need to make sure that software that hasn't been approved by IT can still be installed if people need to use it to get their job done. And so I've included a few examples in the deck: JAWS, NVDA, color analysis, magnification. All of the videos should be closed captioned and described, audio described as necessary. At VMware, we set up a buddy system where the new employee can reach out to somebody outside of their organization. And outside is really important because you don't want people to feel awkward about asking stupid questions their first couple of weeks of work. So having it be somebody who can help them immediately, but also who doesn't have any involvement with that person going forward in terms of reviews or promotions or anything like that, having them be independent is really good. And on the second side of that communication cycle, having people outside of accessibility, which is where we hire a lot of people with disabilities, getting them exposed to employees who are deaf, employees who are blind, employees who use wheelchairs or have cerebral palsy. That's really important too, because especially in global markets, as bad as the employment rate is for people with disabilities in the US, it's vastly worse in developing countries. So unemployment rate in Armenia, for example, for people with disabilities is 92%. Okay, the employment rate is 8%. So it's a quarter of the bad rate that we already have in the United States. Just, you see the word here, compliant, a lot, and WCAG 2.0 AA repeated over and over. Emails have to be compliant. If your Microsoft Teams is compliant, Slack is compliant, but some communication and collaboration tools aren't. So we try to keep everybody to Teams and Slack where we work. And where do those things go to? Do they have a link to an inaccessible web page or a link to an inaccessible PDF file? It's not just enough for the email to be accessible. Everything that connects to the email has to be accessible as well. So Nancy, I'm going to stop at this point and check to see if there are any questions, and then I'm going to quickly go through the last two sections because I assume you're making this deck available and I know it's getting a little bit late.
Sounds good. I wanted to add one piece to your last one about onboarding, a particular anecdote that I think is very telling. I started work at a particular company in a cohort of about, I don't know, 25 people, and one of whom was somebody in a wheelchair who uses a wheelchair. And so we sat through the full first day of, you know, orientation and met all the executives and la, la, la. And then we get to go out to dinner as a group and meet one another who are in our cohort of new employees. And what did they do? They scheduled us for a place that wasn't too far away. And we were on the second level. And of course, there's only a staircase. And I said, surely somebody checked on this before. No. And so our friend Joe or Bill or whatever this guy's name was not going to be able to get into the dinner and miss the whole social thing. And I could just see from his expression that he was used to having this kind of thing happen. And he said, don't worry about me. I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a fun time. And I thought, whoa, you don't get it. You know, this is where you actually make your connections with other people in the organization who are going to help you get things done. And, you know, we're part of the same alumni entry group, but he didn't get to be fully part of that group. I have one other
Yeah,
question.
I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Secondary, and this is probably something you'd only think of if you are a wheelchair user or you're close to somebody who's a wheelchair user. I work at VMware. We have a lot of buildings that have been retrofitted after the ADA with elevators. And so like in the building that I'm in, we have one elevator that connects the basement and the first floor, and we have a second elevator that connects the first floor and the second floor. Well, my team, who existed before I came on board, was on the second floor. So of course I'm on the second floor with my team, and they took that elevator out of commission.
Oh yeah.
For maintenance, and I couldn't leave the building for 4 hours until they put the elevator back together, because it was the only way out of the building. And a lot of our buildings are like that, and partially, like I said, because it's post ADA retrofitting, and partially because we're built into a hillside. But you really need to think about things like, okay, if the building caught fire, how am I going to evacuate this person? How are we going to who is responsible for telling the fire department that there's somebody that needs to be, you know, carried down the stairwell? So those are things that are really important to wheelchair users, that until you actually have had a wheelchair user, your facilities people may not have thought of those things.
Exactly. I want to introduce you to Nandita Gupta. And Nandita, I have unmuted you so you can speak now and tell us a little bit about your situation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much. Thank you all again so much for the presentation. It's been pretty amazing just hearing everyone speak. One of the situations I ran into recently was, you know, when I was advocating for, again, accessibility in the website. This happened during just a personal experience of checking my own website and own portfolio for accessibility. I was trying to add audio to my website to kind of provide, you know, like a different mode of entry. So if someone wanted to listen to my website instead of just reading things. And so I added these things called audio blocks. And after I added them, one of the things I did was, let me just do a manual check, test it with the screen reader, see what it does. And when I tested it, I was really shocked to see that it completely skipped the play button. And the other wave checkers and things, they didn't catch that. So I was really confused. I was like, hold on a second. It passes the audit, but when I'm testing it, it's just completely going over the play button. So someone who wanted to listen to my website, all of a sudden, they'll just never even know it's there. Or if they're using a screen reader, they're never going to know it's there. So I was in the situation where I didn't know what to do. I was tempted to just reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter and be like, hey, this is super inaccessible. But then I found a support website. I turned in a ticket, and their reply really, really annoyed me. I got the fluff about, oh, our company is committed to accessibility, and here's some links on what we do, blah, blah, blah. And the last line really shocked me, where they said, there may be specific elements that are inaccessible. So we recommend you go ahead and get with an accessibility consultant. And I responded back. I was like, no, you don't get my problem. What you sent me didn't fix it. Here are the specific issues. I'm happy to get on a call and even demonstrate what's going on. I can even tell you how to fix it. It's just a matter of fixing it. Then someone else responds back and says, oh, thank you so much for clarifying. I'll add this to a feature request, but we give you no guarantees. So I'd really love to get advice on how to deal with that. I've had some instances where, I mean, I'm attending a disability and conference right now, and I was one of the next gen leaders, and they matched us with some companies. And during the matchmaking, some of the companies I would paired with, I realized they had inaccessible websites. And when I brought it up, they were super receptive. Like, they were like, oh, we get it. Awesome. Thank you for letting us know. But this experience with my portfolio just really, I guess, astounded me, and love to get feedback on how to proceed on something like that.
So I will be the first to say that VMware is not 100% accessible yet. Our accessibility program is only about 1.5 years old. We have, I want to say, something like 96 remediation projects in process right now. So sometimes our hearts are in the right place, but our actions haven't not quite necessarily caught up with our hearts. So it's important to understand what's your current state and what's the roadmap, okay? Because it's the combination of the two that's going to decide what your relationship with that technology might be in the long term. So in terms of audio blocks, Wave can only test for about 30% of the overall WCAG requirements. 70% of the testing still has to be manual. And it might have been that the third party wasn't exposing through the API the bit that Wave needed in order to do the accessibility test. So you're never going to be able to count on just the Wave results to deter, or Lighthouse or Axe. It literally does not matter what accessibility test tool it is. There is nobody that gets it more than, I've heard one claim of 35%, and that's with AI and machine learning added in, and I'm not even sure I believe that.
Wow.
So probably the best way to handle it is to have some hidden text or something at the top as soon as the page loads to make that information available to a screen reader user, even if you can say, oh, this is, you could tell them what the keystroke combination is to trigger it, for example. Or you could say, hey, this block is coming up and it's inaccessible, but your screen reader is going to pick everything up that you need to know. The rule of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and some people don't like it when I explain this rule, is you don't have to make every path accessible, okay? The ADA did not make stairs illegal. The ADA says that you have to have one set of ramps and one set of elevators at a minimum that connect you to all the points that the elevators and the stairs take you to. So it's perfectly fine to have an inaccessible path as long as the accessible path is highlighted and the accessible path contains everything that the inaccessible path contains.
Okay,
So
that
I
helps.
think that answers your question. Because that
It does. Thank you.
it kind of harkens back to these the audio tweets that Twitter tried to release about a month ago.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, we have audio tweets and we have text tweets. We just don't have tweets where you can do audio and text at the same time. And we're like, okay, that's not cool. You need to be able to associate the two so that a deaf person can be able to participate in the audio tweet and a blind person can participate in the other type of tweet as well. And then, of course, it came to light that Twitter had allowed their accessibility team to evaporate and they didn't replace them. So that didn't help their image amongst the disability community either.
Right.
Were there any other questions about phase 1, or should I just quickly go through phase 2 and phase 3?
I think I'd like you to go through phase 2 and phase 3, and we'll cycle back to if there's some more questions. How about that?
Sure, that sounds great.
And I'm going to stop my video, and so you'll just see you and the interpreter.
Okay. So policies, and the policies are where you get into more, this is what you do for people with disabilities, and that is what you do for other underrepresented minority groups. In the previous section, largely we were talking about actual access. And the only thing that would be different for people with disabilities and people of color or people, women in tech, would be where you would go to recruit those individuals. Really, the only recruiting was the different aspect of it. Policies are somewhat specific to disabilities, like the centralized reasonable accommodations process. But employee resource groups, for example, could be about any underrepresented minority. Talk circles can be for any underrepresented minority. So I'm gonna touch on a couple of the ones here that I think are the most important. And the key word for reasonable accommodations process is centralized, especially once you get over about 50, 75 employees, you're going to get to the point where if the managers are making decisions about reasonable accommodations, they're going to be making them based on two things, neither of which are whether the employee with the disability actually needs the accommodation that they're requesting. And the two things that they're going to decide based on are, one, do I like this person? And two, how much is this going to cost me? Is this coming out of my budget? When you centralize that process, you pull out both of those biases because you have somebody in HR who has the budget to spend, who is in charge of making all the decisions, who makes sure that the decisions are applied equally to everybody across the company. Because it's not fair for one manager to say, sure, work from home is fine. This is more of a pre-COVID thing. But something that I actually experienced were two different managers in our department. One said, work from home, no problem. And the other said, no, I don't like people who work from home. If you want more than one day, you're going to have to go to the mats and fight over it. So even when it was being made for medical reasons, they were, one manager was fighting it and one manager didn't care. And if you were lucky and had the manager who didn't care, you were fine. But it shouldn't be at the whims of the manager. It should be at a centralized, standardized, well-defined process. Employee resource groups are really important. Before I took the job at VMware, I specifically asked, do you have a disability employee resource group? And the answer was, no, not yet, but we're trying to get one to started. Would you like to be in charge of it? So be careful what you ask about sometimes, but seriously, we now have 200 or 300 people regularly attending the meetings. We're providing support networks, both for people with disabilities and for allies. We get people who have siblings who are disabled. We have people with children who are disabled, people who are dealing with disabled parents. It's really important to provide this support at all of those levels. And then talk circles with D&I is important because, you ratchet it up, ERGs have sometimes been seen of as social gatherings and not with a business mandate in mind. And you need to make the leap from being a get-together where you just talk about stuff to actually getting the point where you can actually get stuff done. And getting stuff done requires access to the people who can make the decisions. So our ERG and many other ERGs at VMware have regular meetings with people in D&I. We bring in people as needed from procurement or from IT, and to make sure that if there is something that we see that we need to benefit all people with disabilities at VMware, like for example, we decided to do a reasonable accommodations catalog, that all the people who need to buy into that can be brought into the room and can be put under pressure to make a decision. And then obviously D&I policies or goals that specifically call out the target groups. 96% of D&I charters do not include disability. So those 96% we call diverse-ish. It means they're pretending to be diverse, but they're not really diverse because they're not including disability under their definition of diversity. I'm happy to say that I work for one of the 4%. And so that it's really important to make sure that if you're doing a D&I report, disability needs to be called out in that D&I report. What are you doing for people with disabilities? How are you tracking your self-identification rates? So regular self-identification campaign is down here on number 5. Just from adding our disability ERG, our self-identification rate literally went up almost 75% overnight. Because people felt like, okay, I can bring my authentic disabled self to work. I can talk about my disability and nobody's gonna make fun of me. So I do not underestimate the power of having an ERG of any kind, be it for Latinx, LGBTQ, women in tech, whatever it's for. ERGs should be led by the people, but should be supported by D&I. Okay, how do you know if you have a problem? So the government goal for employment of people with disabilities is 7%. There is exactly one company in the Fortune 200 that is achieving that goal. In order to achieve that goal, 1 out of every 30 people needs to have a visible disability, and 1 out of every 7 should have a hidden disability that, actually that should be 15, I apologize. 1 out of every 15 should have a hidden disability that they're willing to talk about. Google doesn't, even have 7%. Their rate is slightly over 6, I've heard. So if you're missing any of the things on this slide, or if your self-identification rate is vastly below 7%, and if you want to find out what the self-identification rates are for your particular industry, there's a group called the National Organization on Disability, and they actually keep track of self-identification rates by sector. So what's the rate for healthcare? What's the rate for higher ed? You can actually get that information if you're a member of NOD. So that's what you should be looking at to tell whether or not you have a problem. Silence is not a sign that you don't have a problem. Silence is sometimes a sign that you don't even know that you have a problem, or that there's not enough people to even talk about the fact that there's a problem. Okay, finally, retention. So again, you're starting to see some variations on a theme here, so I'm not going to harp on accessibility too much more. Ease to public transportation is really important. A lot of people with disabilities don't drive. I have had the privilege of having a good enough job that I could afford the, I think it was $3,000 retrofit to my car so that I could drive with hand controls. Not everybody can afford that. And, people with substantial levels of vision loss, self-driving cars aren't there enough yet. So public transportation is still important to this group. Sensory-friendly rooms. So 9% of people in tech, according to a Stack Overflow survey of about 60,000 people in tech, 9% of them identify as being neurodiverse, meaning they have autism or attention deficit disorder or dyslexia. Okay? All of those people can benefit from having a place to just go to shut out outside stimuli when they've kind of reached their processing limits, when it's starting to, the stimuli is impeding their ability to get work done. So having a place that you can go off and separate yourself from for a little bit as necessary is really useful. And then you want to look at specific benefits for people with disabilities, sponsoring disabled related organizations, and even having disability as part of your board discussions. So for companies who sign up for something called the Valuable 500, which is a nonprofit that's EU-based, but it's global, that's trying to get disability on board agendas. Disability as part of diversity should be on board agendas. And it's something that even I'm working towards at VMware. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Sorry, I think I probably went a little bit over and I started late, so that didn't help. But I'm happy to answer any other questions. Yeah, D and I, sorry.
Yeah, D, I wanted to just clarify because somebody asked about that. So D and I means?
Diversity and inclusion.
And then we sometimes now hear it as DEI.
DEI, which is diversity, equality, or equity, depending on who you talk to, and inclusion, or sometimes you even see belonging in there as well.
Right. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. One for Don. So let's see if we can have Don visible again. Now we got 2 interpreters, and maybe I should just turn myself off. So this can be big enough. Or Sheri, you could get rid of the screen sharing.
I'm gonna turn mine off. There we go.
Okay. Don, I don't see you yet. Smita, I know you can help us with this.
Yeah,
Yay.
I'm here now. Yeah.
Okay. So Don, I'm going to read you a question from Jackie Lee, who asks, how do we assess assistive technology for people who become deaf later in life and don't know ASL? You want me to start again?
Hang on. I'm just trying to clarify who's interpreting right now because that wasn't clear on my screen.
Okay, I think Patty.
Okay, I think I'm.
Oh.
Sorry, I didn't have my screen quite set up to see the interpreter. Okay, so Patty, you're interpreting? Yes. Okay, great. Go ahead. Sorry, can you repeat the question then, please?
Patty's interpreting for me and Dan will interpret for you. So hold on. So the question from the audience. How do we assess assistive technology for people who become deaf later in life and don't know ASL versus people who were born deaf or learned sign early? Would technology that maps sound to another sensory modality, such as the vibrating vest or chip on the tongue, be more relevant to people who could speak but lost their hearing later in life?
Yeah, I think for that group of people, because they already have awareness of what these words sound like, the expectations are already there, so it suits them. But for a person like me, I'm rather doubtful about the ability for me to interpret those signals via my tongue or via vibrations on my body. I think it's too much of a stretch for a person like me. But I guess if you have the motivation, anything is possible. But I think for the specific category of people that you're talking about, that may be true. People who are becoming deaf. For deaf people who are in the community of deaf people, you really need to talk with us to see what we want. And it can't be from a purely non-deaf hearing perspective.
I'm just going to throw in my own 2 cents here, and that is, think about your aging parents or grandparents. Are they going to want to stick a chip in their mouth and learn how to read tongue vibrations and walk around with this device that they keep putting in their mouth to hear you? So I think there could be some acceptance, but I'm not sure it would be universal with the late deafened crowd. But thank you for the question. I want also to have Ted, I'm going to turn on your, where I lost you, Ted.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, you've got audio. Okay, you had a question that people didn't get to hear yet.
What was that?
I think it was actually for Sheri, and it was about disability positive job postings.
Yeah, I have a, I mean, I know many people that are disabled that are quite daunted. And in fact, come away, I have a high functioning autistic son with a degree in graphic design that has no idea how to get a job. And, it has to do with a lot of things, but his experiences when he gets a job are, they often, anyway, I just wanted you to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So VMware and a lot of larger tech companies have started doing what are referred to as autism at work programs. And that originally came from, I think, SAP, and I can't remember who with them. But the idea,
we tried to get through to that SAP people. I went to their kickoff, and of course, nobody responded to our requests after that.
Okay. So we run 2 cohorts a year. It's a week-long process. So we have an applications round. Then we get it to a smaller group of people who go through the evaluations, and then we pick a smaller group of people still who are brought onto campus, and then they spend a week getting accustomed to the campus and the hiring managers. So the actual hiring managers participate for the entire week, and then we do offers at the end of it. So we had, I think, something like 700 applications for 5 jobs. It's pretty competitive. It was a pilot program, and we're expanding it. It's been very successful. We make sure that people who identify as neurodiverse get paired up with people either on their teams or outside of their teams, depending on what their preference is, to help them work through communications issues. some people who are coming through vocational rehabilitation come with job coaches. So the job coach is involved with some of the things that are going on at the campus, or will meet individually with the person and the manager to try to figure out, you know, just how to make the person who's neurodiverse more comfortable with the situation, but also to help the other team members learn how to best interact with the person who's neurodiverse also. So I'm hoping that we're looking at opening up a program like that in China. I know that doesn't help your son, sorry. But those kinds of programs are getting more and more popular. And I would definitely look for one of those. And if your son's not part of vocational rehabilitation and he's over, let's say 24, that might be an opportunity for you as well. Because they know where those programs are being run. They know who's doing that hiring. It's not always enormous companies like VMware, because sometimes it's smaller companies as well. It was funny when you said disability positive. I usually have a line on my job descriptions that says native users of assistive technology preferred, which is like reverse discrimination.
I mean, one of the things that's most upsetting is that these, you know, is people that are trying to do the right thing, like you, when you take 700 people and then they have a chance of being one of 5, when they're already, when any interaction.
That's true for all of our jobs, though.
Yeah, I know.
You know, at this point, we're getting 700 applications for every job. And
yeah,
you know, hiring is what it is right now.
Sure.
So I know it's not optimal, but it's definitely a starting point, and it's been successful at every company I know that's done this. And I'm hoping that once we talk amongst ourselves about all these successes, that we'll be able to build it into something bigger. You know, the fact that, you know, 4.5% of people in tech say that they identify as autistic means that a lot of them are getting jobs and a lot of them are hiding it. And that creates its own set of problems. I don't think that that's necessarily the right way to go either. I think encouraging an environment where people can talk about their autistic traits is the best thing to do for everybody, because it destigmatizes autism for the people who are not autistic. And it helps the people who are autistic not worry about, oh my gosh, I have to hide this, I don't want anybody to know. The Harvard Business Review paper on the cost to industry of people hiding disabilities it's just crazy how expensive it is in terms of engagement and job turnover. And it's a hidden cost because companies don't see that hitting their balance sheet. But the HBR study proves that it's true, and the Accenture study on the value of having disability diverse employee bases also helps.
Can you say something about that, about the value?
Yeah, so Accenture did a study about the net profit. I'm trying to remember the 3 things that they measured. They measured net profit, gross profit, shareholder value, and the 3rd thing. But anyways, it was between 20 and 34%, I think, higher for companies that identified as highly diverse as opposed to companies who did not.
That's what we're talking about.
Cool. Any final comments from Don? Do you have anything else?
Somebody asked about accessible social media, and I just want to mention that Microsoft and Apple are both pretty much the gold standard when it comes to accessibility in all forms, including down to packaging. So if you want to look at somebody's social media campaign that's really accessible and how to do it, that would be who I would look at. And also, I actually have an article that I wrote about a year ago about how to make your own social media posts accessible. So if you ping me on LinkedIn or Google my name and accessible social media, you'll find it.
So Lisa Rose mentioned, and maybe you can read along with me here. When I first began listening to a deaf person speaking through an interpreter, I had to learn how to concentrate my focus visually on the deaf person and not on the interpreter. When the signer is interpreting me for the deaf person. How does the deaf person modulate back and forth between looking at me and looking at the signer? Wait a second. Do we want to have Dan?
I'm assuming you're asking me that question.
I'm assuming it's you also, Don.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, it's a bit hard to describe because I do focus on the interpreter, but I'm also talking to the person who's actually having the conversation with me and try to share my gaze with them as much as possible with the interpreter. But when I'm watching the interpreter, I have to do that sort of back and forth dance. And it's just sort of a gut feeling that I know when I have the affordance to check in with the hearing person and maintain eye contact with them, then look back at where the message is being interpreted. So it just comes from experience. It just starts to be a natural thing you do.
And it's sort of how you get to Carnegie Hall, right?
Exactly.
Yes, I signed practice. Okay. Sheri, any last comments? Thank you for Nandita found your article about accessible social media and it's in the chat. It will disappear when we hang up on this call, but it will still be available. I'll try to collect some of these links from both Sheri and Don so that you can find them without going through the whole hour-plus video that we're doing now.
Yeah, and Tamar posted the link to the Accenture study.
Cool. All right, I'll clip those for myself and then we'll be able to find them later. Thank you, that's great. And I think that we are going to say thank you to everybody who made this evening possible. Of course, thanks to our speakers, Sheri Byrne-Haber and Don Grushkin. Thank you to our two interpreters, Patty Lassard, who you see on the screen, and Dan Veltri, whose voice you've been hearing. And thank you very much also to our captioner, Cindy Hines, who came to us through ACS Caption. And I'm going to wish everybody a lovely evening. And we'll see you next month at BayCHI, same bat station, same time. That is, we meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 7:30, unless you see a posting otherwise. So next, in August, the second Tuesday will be filled by Barbara Tversky, Tversky, professor at Stanford. And we will look forward to more fun BayCHI programs soon. Thank you all.
So long.